Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. As always, today we've got another Cardano focused show for you. Today we're talking about ADA Handle, project that I'm quite fond of. So we brought the co-founder, Calvin, to talk about it, and we'll just go through the whole gamut, explaining to you what it is, get some insight on building it and what's next as well. So Calvin, thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show and all you do for the Cardano space. So glad to be here.
Hey, appreciate that, man. So, well, I guess the best place to start then would be if you could give kind of an introduction, about yourself, how you got in the space, and what led you to build ADA Handle.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cardano, I actually got into Cardano when I was listening to podcasts. I think it was a podcast called Crypto 101, maybe.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
interviewed just a ton of crypto founders and stuff. So Charles did an interview on it. And I remember listening to like all these, I was like listening to IOTA was one of them, a ton of Ethereum ones. I was just kind of like trying to wrap my head around it. And this actually wasn't that long ago. This is probably a year or a year and a half ago. So it wasn't that long. And then I remember having, the podcast with Charles, and it just like blew my mind. And it was like, okay, first off, Cardano is like in a league of its own. But second, like Charles is so like he explains things so well, it like just got me hooked.
Yeah.
So then I just went down the rabbit trail. And then like from there, I crypto Twitter is obviously a huge one. The Reddit forums were actually like really huge. Actually, the Cardano Reddit is really incredible. Reminded me a lot of the open source WordPress days, like back in the day of blogs and GitHubs and stuff, and just people talking about awesome, cool things.
Yeah, the
And I
OGs.
actually like, yeah, exactly. And I totally like built my whole career as a software engineer from WordPress. So it was like super fun for me. But I remember writing a post on the Reddit, and being like, I'm hooked because of the community. Like the technology is awesome, but the community is super vibrant. And I could tell, like I knew there's all these super sweet things that could be built on Cardano. And I think a lot of times with blockchains, we kind of rely on the protocol to build those cool things.
Mhm.
Um, but the vibrancy of the Cardano community, I had total confidence that it would be a grassroots thing. Like, and a perfect example of this is the Nami wallet, just
Yeah.
built by some dude, Barry, who's he's brilliant, but like completely open source, and just threw it out
Yeah.
there. He was like, why don't we have a wallet?
Yeah, we
So
need a wallet that's browser compatible that we can use
mhm.
for dApps. And yeah, and that's one of the cool things about this space in general, and in particular, one of the things that's unique about the Cardano space is the thought that was put into the treasury system and Catalyst and
Yeah,
incubating things. And I've had conversations on Twitter recently about how I think, developer focused things like tools and wallets and that sort of like utilities don't get enough credit and enough attention, but that's something that'll come over time, I think.
yep.
So that being said, speaking of utility, right, let's talk about ADA Handle, which is really cool. And I think, people will be familiar with the concept, but if you could, please give folks the 101 on
Yeah,
what you're building.
yeah. So I guess maybe the inspiration of Ada Handle was I was getting into NFTs. Obviously, Cardano had an explosion of NFT activity right after. Um, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like blank out. It wasn't
The Mary
Shelly. It was
fork.
thank you,
Yeah.
Mary. I was like, there's like so many of these.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like once that was live, just NFTs started pouring out of the gate. And in hindsight, after building Ada Handle, I know why. It's so easy to make an NFT on Cardano. Um, so anyway, I was in that space in the crypto Twitter sphere and just talking a lot about NFTs, and like we were in like probably the big part of the NFT bubble where it was just mania and people were paying
Hmm.
absurd amounts of money for these NFTs. And I mean, I thought that was cool, but I was like, there's so much more use for this provable ownership, and also like um yeah, just like the ability to encapsulate value into something that you can transfer around.
Hmm.
Um, and so I started kind of just thinking about like what were different ways that we could have utility out of handles, or sorry, utility out of NFTs. And so out of that kind of came Ada Handle. And I remember um, I I tell the story a lot just because I think it's like kind of incredible about how open source communities like ideas can kind of turn into something a lot more than just an
Mhm.
idea. And I'm a side project kind of dude. Like I have a full-time day job
Mhm.
and I just do these side projects because they're fun. And they're also like experimentations, ways for me to learn new technology. And
Mhm.
so I at the time I was really heavily doing the Crypto Drip, which is kind of a media podcast platform, and that was taking a ton of my time. That's actually how I did a lot of my research into Cardano on that platform, and also Ergo and just UTXO in general. And Conrad, I he had come on as part of the core team for the Crypto Drip, and so we were going to build this out in greater detail. Um, and I remember messaging Conrad on Discord and being like, "Hey, dude, you want to like build a side project with me?" And he was like, and Conrad, he's always just like super energetic. Like anytime you pitch anything to him, he's like, "Absolutely, let's do it right away." And so I was like, "Okay, cool." And I remember telling my wife, "Hey, babe, I have this new idea." And at the time, I was super stressed out with the Crypto Drip. It was the Crypto Drip was kind of becoming a thing in itself, and so she was like, "I don't know, you're crazy. I don't know why you have another idea." But I was like, "It's a good idea." And I was like, "It's going to take me like maybe 2 to 3 weeks to build."
Famous last
And
words, man.
famous last words. And if you don't know much about ADA Handle, it took us probably about 4 months to get to beta sale,
Yeah.
which we just launched. And so what is ADA Handle? I'll just give like a brief overview. It's basically just NFT powered um, address, like custom wallet addresses that users can use. So right now, whenever, and it's true across a lot of blockchains, where you get this long cryptographic hash, and that's your address,
Mhm.
and it's a copy paste mayhem, and some people like it that way, and I think that's great. Like I think there's actually a use case for that.
Mhm.
Um, but for your average Joe and my mom, she's going to want to have something like, can I just send it to like a name?
Yeah.
um and so NFTs are kind of this way to create not only um a custom name for your wallet, but also to be able to transfer that name around, give it to somebody else, sell it. It's a lot like domains, but in
Mhm.
function it's a lot different. It's more just like, it's like if you were to be able to own your Twitter handle.
Right.
Like right now, for instance, right? I think we just, man, what was it? Somebody on Twitter had the handle Meta. Maybe this was
Yeah,
on
this
Instagram.
was something. Yeah, it was on Instagram, and when Facebook rebranded, they just yanked it.
They just yanked it because, well, they own Instagram, right?
Yeah,
So
and they own the
there's
handle.
something about that. But at the same time, yeah, you don't own that value, and
Hmm.
there's not a lot of opportunity to actually be able to pull the value out of a name. And there's a lot
Yeah,
in a name, right?
there is.
Um, so yeah, so that's kind of where ADA Handle was. It was an exploration of utility and NFTs, and that's how they were issued.
Nice. Yeah. So basically, in a very basic functionality, it's mapping a human readable name that is, defined as an NFT on the Cardano blockchain that maps to one to many payment addresses, which are these ugly alphanumerics that no one really, realistically, no one really likes to use. It's like people
Right.
are used to it now, but no one really likes it. Um,
Yeah.
would that be a good summary?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends on how you're describing one to many. It's you can have many handles to one wallet. You can't have
Mhm.
one wallet to many handles.
Got it. Okay. Makes
Yep.
sense. Makes sense. And so, anecdotally, looking back, and you mentioned this, right? It took you a lot longer to build
Mm-hmm.
than you had expected. And I will say, I think there will be people who will immediately say, "Oh, it's because you're on Cardano. It's way harder." But in reality, like
Yeah.
as someone who, you know, worked full time as a developer for a long time and like just recently moved out of that type of role,
Mm-hmm.
every time I said, "Oh, this will take me a week," it took
Mm-hmm.
me 3 weeks. It's like a
Yeah.
thing that developers do. You always think it's going to take you less time than it will.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was the experience like for you building? You know, how much of it was learning a new frontier? How much of it was like limitations in tooling, just changing your
Hmm.
approach? What was it like?
Yeah. I mean, so it was a man. There is there's probably bottlenecks in every area, and a
Hmm.
lot of that was probably due to ignorance. This is the first project that I personally had built on Cardano, so there's a high learning curve for me.
Hmm.
And we did a lot of testnet runs actually, and I'm glad that we did, um, to try and get this system to work appropriately. Because as it stands right now, like most NFTs on Cardano, they will each one will like they'll just do it in a batch, and it doesn't matter. Like it's the only thing that matters or that's different between them is like an image,
Hmm.
and then they sit under a policy ID, and that policy ID is locked for a certain amount of time. Our situation's a lot different.
Hmm.
We have to perpetually be able to mint. So we have to basically allow, like, let's say anybody at any time wants to get a handle, they should be able to go get a handle. They should be able to go get that handle under the current active policy ID, which means the policy ID can never really lock.
Hmm.
Um, and so there on that side, there's a lot of just nuances to consider. The other thing is that Cardano will not prevent you from creating the same fingerprint. Like, so the same NFT, and the fingerprint, for those who don't know, it's the asset name with the policy ID.
Hmm.
So I could create two handles that are identical, and Cardano would not prevent me from doing that. And that was like a huge, I was like,
That's
shoot,
tricky.
like, why not? Like, why not?
Hmm.
Like, it would have been so much easier if two people tried to get it and the Cardano just rejected one of those and accepted the other one.
Hmm.
So because of that, we had to create a whole gateway system. And that is like, it's hard because it's pretty centralized to do that, to be able to say, like, one, if I'm going to mint an NFT, it's going to have a single set of keys, and
Hmm.
so there has to be a central party who can issue these handles. um, and then also, how do we prevent, because as soon as we have a double mint, uh, it's a lot of damage control at that point.
Right.
It affects the quality of the product, it affects the quality of the handles, and the ecosystem. And so we did a lot of like testing and testing and testing, like, can we get a double mint, can we get a double mint? And we had several test nets in our Discord where we were getting double mints, and we were like, man, why is this happening?
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of investigation, and there was kind of like that feedback loop. And also, the other thing is, I think for the first maybe 2 months, it was just me and Conrad
Hmm.
uh, building this entire thing. And then we got to a point where I was like, shoot, I'm like, well, one, I was working maybe 60 or 70 hours a week. I was super sleep deprived. Conrad wasn't
Hmm.
sleeping at all. And we were like, we're making stupid mistakes at this point. And so
Yeah.
we went out and found two other super talented engineers with a lot of experience. And that took a lot of the weight off of my shoulders. And then we were able to kind of like scale a little bit better, and actually write some load testing on it. And so yeah, I think there is a lot of, that's like my long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's good.
There's like, milestones along the way, and it was a roadmap that wasn't necessarily, we knew what we wanted. Like, I remember tweeting maybe a couple of weeks ago that um, I was 75% sure when I created the ADA handle brand that it was even possible.
Yeah.
Um, right. And I think you have to kind of take that leap at some point of what's like, we're going to have to explore this and figure out like what our limitations are, but I'm not going to wait around before I'm like 100% sure, like, we're going to get up, let's go, let's not wait
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, you have no choice when you want to build something, especially in a new area. And as early as we are, I think people are frustrated with in the Cardano space sometimes because things take a while. And we
Mm-hmm.
had smart contracts, but you don't have, you have some dApps that are functional or at varying degrees of functionality, but you don't have like this monstrous ecosystem yet. And I think the reason is because people maybe don't fully appreciate that this is a completely different paradigm. Like, this is not like you port something you've done somewhere else and you just move it over here and it just works.
Yeah.
and it's very fresh and new, and you're coming across different programming challenges and different structural challenges, like you mentioned with
Mhm.
the root cause of potential double mints that you had no idea you would face until you start doing it. So you have to
Right.
start. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the biggest, I think one of the biggest complications was the confirmation times were not consistent.
Hmm.
So you could have, like, let's say, like during our beta sale, you could have a session to buy a handle and that would be valid for 10 minutes. So how do you track the time that
Hmm.
that session was actually there versus how long it takes to actually confirm on the blockchain? So like normalizing that relationship. And then also, what do you do when somebody does make a successful payment, but it confirms after the session's over? Then what do you do with
Hmm.
that money? And yeah, so there was a lot of, I think that was the biggest curveball for me personally was, well, what do we do like when the blockchain's at 90%? And I can't actually, it's hard for me to emulate a clogged blockchain because I would have to write my own script to clog the blockchain, and that's like
Yeah.
difficult to do. So
Yeah. In your own, you have
yeah,
to set up your own testnet scenarios. Well, I
yeah,
mean, now you have not only retrospect to look at for the build process, which is interesting to say the least, but you also now have the ability to look retrospectively at the beta launch. Like, how
mm-hmm.
did that go? I mean, some people that are watching might have participated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are some of the lessons learned there, and like some of the things that you think went really well as well?
Yeah. I think. Well, I think let's move to the question of like what was the purpose of the beta launch, right? Because I think
Sure.
a lot of people were asking like, why is there a 15,000 handle cap? That was like we were basically opening up the sale until we got 15,000 handles, and then we were cutting it off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for us, the purpose was basically to limit the fallout in the event that
It didn't work.
we got a double mint or
Yeah.
something happened where our address resolving didn't work the way that we intended or whatever it might be. I mean, betas are for getting a sizable amount of data input from real world users, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our purpose for the beta sale was to ensure that one, we could have it reliably run under high demand, high stress, and not get a double mint. That was probably 90% of our reason for the beta sale.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that worked. We minted 15,000. I think it was 131 and that was due to like kind of the pending sessions before we actually hit. So then we had like about 131 that came through at the end. And we didn't have any double mints. So that was awesome. In that regard, the beta sale was like a total success. It went exactly how I thought it was going to go in terms of like how we interacted with the blockchain. The other side of the beta sale was to test the user experience and the UI design and actually the process of searching for a handle. Like how can we reliably look, like be aware of other sessions that are happening, all that type of stuff. Because they all have like a 10-minute window. So there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts all happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that was enlightening during
Yeah.
the beta sale. I think I want to say we had a total of, I want to say like 15 to 20,000 emails in the queue for the duration. And the beta sale, it lasted about 22 hours before we hit 15,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually, we sold out faster than I thought. I was anticipating for like 2 or 3 days because we had actually, and this was the other complication was we were doing a queuing system
Mm-hmm.
to prevent, to prevent clogging up the blockchain. Because if you've been a part of any NFT sale, it's just mayhem.
Yes, to
It's
say the
just like,
least.
yeah, it's just like everybody's drowning. And even if you haven't been on an NFT sale, you've probably used the blockchain during an NFT sale and didn't even know
Mm-hmm.
it, except for the fact that your transaction keeps failing. So for starters, because we're going to be a persistent thing, we didn't want to contribute to that. So we need to have a mechanism in place to be able to respond to uh, the blockchain load at any time. What we found out for the beta sale was that we were a little bit too conservative. I don't think we didn't even have a minute percentage effect on blockchain load.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing, and this was because some of our architectural decisions, we were doing 20 mints a minute. And those would happen in a single transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So we were doing one transaction a minute for our minting, which is nothing. And then we were letting in about 40 people every 5 minutes, which is about 200 people an hour. And they could have up to 3 sessions at a time. So that would be 600 transactions every 5 minutes would be the max. And that also is nothing.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the things we learned from the beta sale was like, wow, we have a lot more room, which is awesome.
That's a good
it's
lesson.
awesome. We can, and the other thing too is like, we can create it to dynamically we should be able to open the floodgates when we're at like 20%, mm-hmm. and start narrowing them down when we're at like 80%. And so, that's one of the things that we want to improve on. The other thing is we had people, so we were doing email verification to handle the queue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. Like, it's very hard to predict where you are in line. So from a user experience standpoint, there was a lot of anxiety, and this came from probably about half the community of like, where the heck is my access code? Like, why don't I have my email? And I'm like, and like I empathize with that feeling. That feeling is frustrating. I actually didn't even get an access code. I asked one of my friends who got in before me. I was like, hey, go grab this one for me. And he did, thankfully, but like, I didn't even be able to get in there. And so I think that is definitely like our highest priority, is to create a better user experience. And we have a lot of ideas on how to do that. And we also have, I want to say, and we haven't necessarily figured out how we're going to do this, but like, once we hit 15,000 sales, we still had like 6,000 to 8,000 people in line. Mm-hmm. And they never got their email. I've still like, obviously, because we stopped sending emails, but like, I don't know if it was communicated clearly, like, you're not going to get that email because we hit our cap, but you still get lots of questions, and that's not on the user, that's on us for not creating a better experience. But like I said, I think our main priority was not to hit the double mint. And then our goal is to streamline the process so that it can just be open all the time, and then open it perpetually.
Right. So that would be a great follow-up question then. Where's your mind at in terms of going to what would be a main, like, open the floodgates, everything kind of, it's handled dynamically in an automated way? Where do you see that landing now that you have these great lessons learned from the beta sale?
Are you asking me for a launch date? Because
I don't even need a concrete launch date. You can give me a thought as to like what the path is to that point, and a region. Yeah. So one thing is we want to automate refunds. So we didn't do that for beta sale. We're aggregating them post beta launch, and we'll send those out in a batch. But that work is going to allow us to just kind of run that on an interval during main sale. So, you won't have to wait a week or two for your refund. It should happen within 10 or 15 minutes. So that's one thing I think we want to get in place before we reopen. Another thing we want to do is so there's 2 parts. I think for the first part of our mainnet or our public sale, we'll still probably be using email, but we'll be having control over the access code. So one of the big frustrations of the beta sale was I got my access code, but it lasted only 10 minutes after I waited 12 hours, right? And oh my gosh, I can't even imagine being in those shoes, because that would be so infuriating, right? So the way that we had it built, we were relying on a third-party verification service, and they didn't let us change. And it was actually 2-factor authentication, and I think that's why it was a 10-minute cap. It was like the goal here is that you just get it, right? Yeah.
Not that we wait and send it to you 12 hours later. And so we have a pretty good plan to just switch off that and create our own verification codes and probably bump those up to about an hour or so. We'll have to find the sweet spot, but the idea being that you would have a lot more of a window to get in, and then also you shouldn't be waiting very long. I mean,
Yeah.
I think on initial launch there would be a higher wait time, right? Because everybody's trying to get a handle at the same time. But during normal operating, like you should be able to get that within 5 or 10 minutes. So that's kind of what like we're wanting to explore before we open up to the main launch is to get this system a little bit more concrete. And then kind of at the same time as that, we want to do wallet authentication. So just bypass email completely. You come to the site, and you should be able to authenticate with Nami or Yoroi or whatever DApp. I think CZ Vault also, they just released their beta DApp. Or their API. So we should be able to allow users to come to the site, authenticate that they have a wallet, that it's staked with a pool. And that would be kind of the requirements. Like if you have a wallet and you're staked and you have at least 10 ADA, which is the cheapest handle, you should be able to just get in. Don't know necessarily how that's going to work with queuing and like throttling. So that's something we have to explore, but it's certainly possible and kind of removes a lot of bot concerns. So that's kind of our plan, to get all those things in place, and then we'll just open up the floodgates after that. And I'm optimistic about early 2022.
Nice. That's cool. I think that will satisfy most people that are going to inevitably ask for a date. But you can never promise anything.
I'm going to keep it to the early year. I mean, I think most people would be pleasantly surprised, but I'm just, obviously I don't want to give false hope. I'd rather under promise and over deliver is, I think, one of the main things I've learned of the last 4 months of building this, for sure.
Yeah. And done right is better than done fast, particularly
100%.
in this space,
100%.
because mistakes here are immutable mistakes. So I think the only other thing that I'm curious about from your perspective is, what are some of the things that, across the space, maybe even just from a developer perspective, from a community member perspective in Cardano, what are some of the things that you think in 2022 like need to happen for Cardano to really start getting that traction in the broader conversation around like smart contract and DApp platforms?
Yeah. Well, Pluto's backend needs to come out. That's an obvious one. We can't do anything until that's out.
Yes.
I think we're really actually getting there with browser wallets, DApp APIs. I think we're really getting there. That was probably the biggest thing that at the beginning of the year I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to be able to use something other than Daedalus, So I think that's a huge thing. I think ADA handle is actually, I mean, not to like toot my own horn, but that was a huge thing for just onboarding of like, we should be able to easily send money back and forth to each other. We should also be able to interact with the Cardano blockchain in almost like somewhat of a metaversy way, where like I can easily see my handle throughout the ecosystem. SundaySwap, they did their test net and they integrated the handle standard in there, and so you can assign your handle on testnet, and it's pretty a cool experience. And I think it's going to be interesting. I think like writing smart contracts in Haskell, I want to like, I'd rather eat dirt personally, just because, and I'm a JavaScript developer, but the reality is like a ton of people are JavaScript developers. So you can't like just stay in Haskell universe. So what I really want to see is like Marlowe come out for users, but which is like the GUI version of building smart contracts, but also like these abstraction layers for other developers to be able to build. Like a good example is there's a library built by Tango Stake Pool that we actually used for the beta sale. But I think it's called Cardano Wallet JS. But really it's a wrapper around the Cardano serialization lib, and it interacts with the wallet API. and it makes things so easy, like
Yeah.
so easy. There are things like, because of our use case, like we had to kind of build some of our own custom code as well, and all of our code's open source on GitHub, so people can totally use that and reuse it. But yeah, things like that, like let me grab modules and be able to build things. Like one thing that would be really awesome, I think, in the community is a Web3 API that
Yeah.
abstracts the connection to all the dApps. That would be amazing.
Yeah. A high level library that's web friendly would be
Mm-hmm.
incredible. I mean, it's
Yeah.
inevitable. It needs to happen. It's really a, when does that happen? And in tandem with things like, you know, Plutus application backend
Well,
and
yeah. Well, it's going to have to happen once we're dealing with smart contracts. I mean,
yeah,
it would be very difficult to interact with a smart contract without a user interface on the web.
without a doubt. Yeah. And particularly if we want to really take advantage of what, like in DeFi, for example, what it's all about, and that is like
Mm-hmm.
diversity of client. Like if I want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
build my own client for a transparent open source smart contract or smart contracts, I need to be
Yeah.
able to build that with common tools and do it quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think we come from a similar background. I come from a web development background and then like Solidity. So me coming to Haskell as well was like a very jarring and painful
Mm-hmm.
thing. And by no means I haven't built anything sophisticated like ADA handle, but just the process of changing the whole paradigm, not just syntactically, but like structurally, is
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot to wrap your head around. And, I will say, like, if we had gone straight to smart contracts for minting, it would have taken us another year probably, just for
Mm-hmm.
like the actual work of getting that done. And also, like, I'm much more concerned about getting code audited when there's a smart contract involved. And
Mm-hmm.
so even that's audits are expensive, but they're also time consuming. And
Yeah.
so that's why we went with, centralized first, and we don't deal with any smart contracts. We just mint it on the
Mm-hmm.
fly via our own wallet API. But there's a on the roadmap for sure to switch over to smart contract minting in the
Yeah.
future.
Well, and I think that's a natural way of things is
Mm-hmm.
you can decentralization is a gradient. You can start on a more centralized side and
Mm-hmm.
gradually it requires trust, but so does
Yeah.
everything, right? You got to trust
Yeah.
the underlying protocol at the end of the day too. So
Yeah.
now, Calvin, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming and sharing
For
like
sure.
just insights about the process, and in doing that, explaining the process of building ADA handle and what that offers people. Uh, Last question is for people who want to get involved and stay engaged with you. Like, where's some of the places that they can find you and ADA handle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our official accounts are well, we only have Twitter, Discord, and our main website. So our
Mm-hmm.
main website's adahandle.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then our Twitter's adahandle. So it's pretty
Cool.
self-explanatory.
Easy.
You can find me on Twitter at Calvin's Brew, and then Goose at Goose of Crypto, and then Conrad at Conrad it with a T,
There you
IT
go.
at the end. Conrad IT. I just
Conrad
call him
IT.
Conrad it. Yeah.
Conrad it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Also impressive that you just rattled those off the top of your head.
I
Nice.
did. Well, I like so many months of just typing them out.
Yeah, I believe it, man. Well, really, I really do appreciate it, Calvin. Thanks for coming on and talking about ADA handle. Thanks to everyone who watched the show. If you have questions, and maybe since we talked about more developer or technical topics, if you have questions about these, please let us know. We'd be happy to dive in a little deeper in the comments, share some stuff on Twitter. And I hope you and your family have a wonderful week or weekend ahead, depending on where you're watching this. Thanks so much. And until next time, cheers.